Hello and welcome. This is episode 5 of Engineer-to-Manager. My name is Oleg Maestrenko. I'm advisor to CDTO here in Kyiv for Kyiv City Council, Ukraine. In this podcast, we are diving into the essence of Engineering-Manager, and I'm inviting experienced guests from all around the world to discuss what engineering management is, what are the challenges, and what are their opportunities. Today's guest is Sarah Milstein. Hello, Sarah. How are you doing?
Hi, Alex. I'm good, thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you here finally after such a long time. So you're currently VP of Engineering at Daily, and previously you were engineering leadership at ConvertKit and MailChimp. Yeah. And before that, you had a huge career in sales marketing with tech consultancy and a career in O'Reilly, which everyone knows, I guess, with all those books for programmers, developers, and managers. Is everything correct?
Yeah, you've got that right.
Yeah, well, nice. So before we jump into the conversation, dear listeners, just subscribe to this video. More is coming, and I'm looking forward to this conversation with Sarah today. So as a VP of engineering, first thing that comes into my mind, what VP of engineering does? What is your role? What are your daily tasks like when you come to work? Well, I guess you're working remotely, as I understand, and like when you open your laptop, what is your first thing that you do in the morning?
Yeah, I check Slack. That's the first thing I do. That's the first thing everybody does. But my role, I can talk about the things I do every day, and one thing I'll note is that Daily is a startup. We're Series B right now. It's about 60 people at the company, 30 engineers. We provide real-time audio and video APIs. And my job is influenced by all of those things: our size, our stage, what we do. If I were a VPE at a much bigger company or at a different kind of software company, my job would be a little bit different. Mm-hmm. I just want to note that. But my day looks like, I think of it as kind of 4 layers. I work with the rest of the exec team to make sure that we're setting strategy and that we're communicating well with our teams and any external partners and our customers about what our strategy is. I work really closely with the engineering managers. I have 3 EMs and we have 5 product engineering teams among us. I work really closely with the EMs to make sure that we are paying attention to cross-engineering initiatives that need attention. Things like improving the cadence of our releases or boosting our testing culture so that we're testing more consistently across the product. Then I'm working with the EMs and the ICs to make sure that the teams all have the information they need to ship regularly, that they know what their priorities are, what they can deprioritize, that they have any other information that they need, and any resources. Mm-hmm. And then I'm working kind of cross-functionally, working with marketing, for instance, to make sure that if we need blog posts that engineers are participating in, that we're supporting that sort of thing. So I think of it as kind of those 4 areas.
So basically, as a VP of engineering in a small team, I would say 50 people, right? You mentioned you basically have a day-to-day connection with ICs, right?
I do. There are a handful of ICs who report directly to me, in addition to the EMs who all report to me.
Got it. And was it different when you were at MailChimp? Because MailChimp is a much bigger size, I guess.
Yeah. When I was at MailChimp, so Daily is like 60 people total with 30 people in engineering, and MailChimp was like 1,400 people total when I was there, and about 400 people in engineering. So it was very medium sized, is how I would think about it. And in that case, most of the people who reported to me were managers, and many of them were managers of managers. Mm-hmm. So there's more layers to it. I always maintained a couple of direct reports with ICs, like a couple of principal engineers. I think that's valuable for staying close to the teams and understanding the kinds of challenges that they're having, and vice versa. I think it's valuable for them to kind of see where is the exec team and what are the things that, in that case, it was like the engineering leadership team, the challenges that we're facing.
I see. And there, I guess, well, if we talk already about MailChimp, that was very fascinating for me to read and realize that basically you had a switch of kind of a industry where you work in, as far as I understand, and you switched from a non-tech company, please correct me if I'm wrong, to kind of a very software-related, software-oriented company, and you managed to go to a very high engineering role, right? Or engineering management role.
Right. So that narrative is not quite right. So I had worked in other roles in software organizations for many years, not in engineering. I'm not an engineer, which is a little bit unusual to then be in engineering leadership. But I had worked in, as you said earlier, in sales and marketing. I'd worked in communications and media roles, and had a really strong sense of how software gets built. And how software gets built is one of the most important things in a software company. Engineering itself is a little bit of a different, it's a parallel, and actually maybe not parallel, overlapping discipline, but they aren't the same thing. How you organize the people to build software, and how you think about the cadence and patterns of software and the risks that are involved, that's different than just the pure coding. And I had done a lot of work where I really was very close to the software development, even though I wasn't in engineering directly.
And before that, so did you ever manage non-engineers, kind of, well, or people?
Yeah, exactly. I had managed communications professionals. I had managed various kinds of operations people, media folks of many kinds. I had a lot of different kinds of people who were reporting to me, but we all did things that touched the software development. So I had a pretty good sense of how it works and where there's pitfalls.
Is there anything different when you go from non-engineering team, let's say, or to a team of engineers? Like, does something change for you as a manager?
Yeah, it's so interesting. When I first took, so MailChimp was the first job that I worked where I was in engineering leadership. And when I took that job, I reached out to like 20 or 30 friends who managed engineers. And I took everybody to coffee individually and was like, what do I need to know about managing engineers? And everybody said, they're just people, you manage them the same as everybody else. And I sort of didn't believe it. I felt like there's something different about the engineers I'm going to need to know. But that turned out to be everybody was right. Like, the people are the same. There's always people who are great to work with and people who are challenging, and the patterns are pretty similar across disciplines. But what's different is that in engineering, in software, as opposed to other kinds of product development or other roles altogether, the risks and opportunities are different. So you have to be aware of those. The risks of, for example, being pulled into a project that's a rewrite or a 3-year-long cycle where there's no value that you're bringing to the customers before that, and you can't assess whether it's going well. That sort of thing is endemic in engineering. And at the same time, the opportunity to build small things and learn quickly, a huge opportunity. But those things don't always exist in other disciplines. So it's a little bit more understanding how software development is different rather than how the people are different, because people are pretty much just people.
Yeah, well, makes sense, but I'm trying to oppose here, because there are sometimes when you talk to engineers, to software developers, to ICs, they prefer to have somebody with engineering background so they can share their pain of something not deploying, a Docker container not running because there is a mistake in some configuration and so on and so forth. So they kind of push towards you a set of technical things that as a person who doesn't work on this daily or doesn't have prior experience is kind of how do you deal in such situation when the person pushes on you technical things that they're kind of crying for help?
It's pretty rare that that happens, because usually people like an early conversation that I have with everybody is, I'm not an engineer, um, but I understand a lot of technical concepts and have been through many like containerization processes where things went terribly. I, some level of the ranting that I can like validate for people, but
Hmm.
more often the way that I learned to work with engineers and that they learn to work with me is as a partnership where if they need to talk about the technical details, they do that with other team members or peers or somebody else in the organization. And they work with me where we can bring each other different pieces of information from around the organization to make better decisions together. So they have technical perspective and they need a little bit more of the business perspective.
Hmm.
Or they are really heads down in a project and they want to know, what do the dependencies look like on other teams and how might that affect them, and do we need to be better coordinated or less coordinated, that sort of thing. Then I can help work on those things and we can figure out which of us should be following up and where does the coordination happen.
Nice, nice. Those two perspectives, or well, several views on the same thing that really helps. Or I guess when you were working on a product project, or to bring different aspects together, and kind of not go only in their development itself. And there, yeah, well, basically, the question that I had, like, you are trying to find somebody, or you're helping them um, to find somebody technical that they can talk to, and
Yeah.
you're saying, well, look, as far as I understood, so you're not technical enough to handle all those small details or architecture decision, but rather help them to see their business perspective and why are they doing their things, and also work with them as people, as a people manager, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think, it's often the case, maybe always the case, that when people are making significant technical decisions, they need to talk things through with other people, like 100%. And I want to encourage people to do that. And usually, who else in the organization will be good to talk about with something, but sometimes they don't, or they don't feel like it's okay for them to bother somebody, especially if they need to talk to somebody else who is known to be very busy or very senior. In fact, even other senior people are sometimes nervous about reaching out to other senior ICs because they know they're busy. And so part of what I do is encourage people, because it's basically always the case that both parties are happy that they've had the conversation afterward. So sometimes just encouraging people to have the conversation is a valuable role I can play.
So we're talking about this encouragement or facilitation of the team, and communication within the team. Would you name this one of the key qualities of engineering manager, or is it something that comes after something different? Like, what are the qualities for engineering managers that you would prioritize for somebody going in this role?
Yeah, I think specifically related to the issue of facilitation, any managing, whether it's in software or anywhere else, you have to be a good listener and be able to really hear what the people who are reporting to you, what your peers are saying, what people higher in the organization are saying, and be able to integrate all of that into some combination of human and technical and business context
Mm-hmm.
and fit that together. So the kind of listening skills are hugely important. Um, Certainly, I think, again, any kind of a manager, if somebody's coming to you with a problem and needs help figuring it out, being able to be flexible and understand, do you have the information they need? Do you just need to coach them and help them think it through? Or do you need to point them in a different direction to learn, and not have it all rest on you? That's important for anybody. But I think, again, back to the idea that software development has its own risks and opportunities. For anybody in engineering management, you need to learn what those are. That's critical, or you can't do the job well. You'll kind of get drawn towards things that look tempting,
Mm-hmm.
that would be a good fit if you were building widgets, but not such a good fit for building apps, for example.
Do you think like any manager from other industry can become an engineering manager?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, So this is a little bit counterintuitive, but my experience has been that the closer you are to the teams, the individual teams that are delivering as a manager. So if you are just associated with one or two teams and you work with them closely to ship software, the more technical you need to be. The higher you get in the stack of management, the more it becomes about people management. So you could become an engineering manager, or in my case, moving into engineering leadership from other disciplines without necessarily being an engineer. But it's pretty hard to be an engineering manager at the individual team level without some technical experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes sense because basically, if you're working directly with a team on a daily basis with their tasks and their, then you basically have to understand their vocabulary,
Yeah.
not on a high level, but on with a kind of hands-on. Because I know some engineering managers are kind of working as a keeper of the backlog, and they even do tasks from their bottom of the backlog that nobody wants to do to keep up
Yeah.
their skills and their kind of contribute to the success of their team, not only by managing them, but also by doing things.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think that's right. You're in a more of a player coach role, as people sometimes say, where you might do some of the technical tasks, understanding what the individual team members need, where they have skills, or where the product needs some kinds of work that somebody has to fill in on. That kind of thing is, I think, very hard to do without some engineering experience. Although often people don't need a ton of engineering experience to be able to do that work.
No. But if you go up, you kind of uh, stop doing engineering tasks and do more, well, communication, people management, and either a role or a way to go up and still or be connected with a kind of software
Yeah.
development.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say a couple things. I mean, first of all, that depends on the individual. If that's something that you want to do, then usually you can shape roles that let you do both. And that's true for ICs too, if you think about it. There's usually roles where ICs can stay pretty heads down and just do a lot of coding, and roles where they can become like team leads or people who have more project management or communication responsibility. So the same is true for managers as well. And it really depends on the company. Some companies need or require managers to be very involved in technical work right up through like a CTO, and other companies that's less true.
Okay, well, that's interesting because indeed I know some CTOs or VP of engineering who are still doing some coding for kind of proof of concept research things, not production code.
Yeah.
Though some are saying like, well, I had their production code in that product, and it's been there for the last 15 years, and maybe it's already refactored, and then
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, well, interesting. And is there anything that you dislike about being a EM or VP?
This isn't specific to engineering. I think a challenge in general of management is that it typically requires coordinating with and working through other people. So sometimes when I'm confronted with a problem and I need to find a solution, lots of times I can think of something right away that I think will solve the problem, but then I have to coordinate with the people who report to me. They have to coordinate with their teams. We have to communicate about it on several levels. So a thing that I could tell somebody in 5 minutes, we'll do it this way, might take a month to get actually organized. So it's a lot slower than IC work typically. Even when you have a lot of like authority in an organization, unquestionably the work of management is much slower than the work of coding or writing or anything else you might do that's just IC kinds of work.
No, yeah. You said authority, and that triggered immediately like how not to get mad when you get access to this authority, if I can say so.
Yeah. I mean, I think an interesting thing about having authority is that if you aren't careful about how you use it, you'll lose all the power of it. So if in your organization doesn't I mean, almost everybody's had the experience of working for somebody who abused their authority in some way, who asked people to do things or required that people do things that were outrageous or like extremely difficult to do, or took way too much time, or was like a bad technical decision or a bad strategic decision. And other people could see that, and they were just being told to do it because the person with the highest title said to do it. And the more you do that, the more you undermine trust in your organization, and the slower the organization will move. There's tons of research that shows that trust is pretty much the most important component for high performing teams. So authority is like, it's a part of the tools that you have, and sometimes I think you have to wield in different ways to get things done. But typically, trust is much, much, much more important, and using authority does not help you increase your trust with people. So it's kind of a limited tool in that regard.
Yeah, I agree. But it's like, well, when there's somebody new comes into this role and gets this kind of responsibility and control of people, well, different things might happen, right? Just curious to see how this develops for different people. Because
it's a great point, Alex. I think one of the things that I've noticed about myself is that as I've gotten farther in my career, I've used, and I've had more authority, I've used it less because I've gotten better at developing the other kinds of connections with people that let us work more effectively. But it's sometimes slower. So that's something I have to balance, of being able to be patient, which is like, no one likes that, with building in a way that is more sustainable and humane, and ultimately will have better outcomes with the team and with whatever the thing is we're trying to do.
You mentioned different kind of relationships, and what are those?
Well, I have, as I was saying earlier, sort of got the peer executive relationships, the EMs who report to me, the ICs, and people in other parts of the organization. And I think in all of those relationships, there's different dynamics. So it's just important to be aware of those and to kind of build trust in whatever way is appropriate in each of those sorts of relationships. Is that answering your question?
Sort of, because it would be nice to see an example, if you can give like a difference, for instance, between their team, because your team is a team of VPs, right? And there is one dynamics, and then there is a team that reports to you, as you mentioned, like 3 EMs now. And what would be, or we can go to some past roles if you want to talk about past. Like, what is the difference between relationship or dynamics on your level and like managing down, or sometimes you were managing up, I guess, right, when you were reporting to somebody?
Yeah. So in that, it's that those different kinds of relationships are different at every organization. At Daily, where I am now, each of the teams that I work with works a little bit differently. So the executive team tends to have a lot of projects where subgroups of us have to work together. Pretty big team. I think there's 9 or 10 of us. Everybody is like quite senior and has a lot of experience relevant to Daily, and usually like some combination of 2 to 6 people within the team will need to peel off to do different projects together, which means that we don't, and 9 or 10 people is a lot to try to make decisions together. So we don't do we have a lot of conversations where we're updating each other across those little sub teams, or conversations where we say this sub team needs to go off and get something done. But that's fairly different from the EMs that work with me. There's 3. So there's only 4 of us total. There are fewer subgroups of people occasionally, but mostly if we're working on a project, we're working on it together. And because it's a much smaller group, our meetings tend to be everybody's participating and we're making decisions together in the meeting. But what's different in terms of, so there's different nature of those groups of people.
Mm-hmm.
But when I think about the relationships, my relationship to those things is very different. I might suggest things to put on like the agenda for an exec team decision or discussion. But ultimately, the CEO decides what we're going to talk about in those team meetings. And if it's something that any of us suggest doesn't get taken up or we don't have time, then I have to go and find the time to meet with people individually or solve the problem a different way. And with the team that reports to me, like I put stuff on the agenda for our weekly meeting, and I'm the one who decides if other things are more important or where else decisions can get made. And that's an example where I try to be mindful that if somebody else has something they want to talk about, I want to make time for it, that I'm not dominating all of the discussion and decision making.
Makes sense.
Does that example help? That was a lot of context for like a short answer, basically. But I think that's part of thing about relationships. It's a ton of context that really matters.
Indeed. One provocative thing is like, can you share like a failure as an engineering manager? Did you? Well, I guess all of us have those stories, and it would be nice to get one of yours.
Yeah. I think certainly, there's no way to be on a team where there aren't like incidents of various kinds and outages and things like that. But I think at this point, we all know those aren't necessarily failures. Those are a failure if you don't learn from it and make adjustments and figure out how to do things better. But the nature of software is it's complex and there are going to be problems. I tend to think of my failures less about kind of engineering or even software development decisions and more about human interactions where I didn't show up in a way that was going to be effective. So for example, an interesting thing about Daily is that it's very low.
Bless you.
Sorry. I'm thinking. An interesting thing about Daily is that it's very low politics, very low conflict. We can disagree, but it doesn't tend to be difficult disagreement. It's usually productive disagreement. And a little while ago, I had proposed, I had identified a problem in a cross-functional project between marketing and engineering, and had proposed a solution and was talking to one of my colleagues about it. I had set a meeting to talk about it, and I thought my colleague would see the problem the same way and would be open to the solution because I thought it was very straightforward. And neither of those things was true. When they showed up at the meeting, they were very, it was a kind of a tense meeting. And it was the first one I've been at Daily for 16 months. And it was the first time I'd had that experience here. I was really taken aback. And I was so surprised that I didn't think to understand better why they were resisting. I thought they just weren't understanding me. So instead of asking them more questions and listening better, I just was like, let me restate why I want to do things this way. That failed completely. I mean, like, you're laughing because like, obviously that wasn't going to work. And, there was a part of me that's like, after that call, I was like, how can I have been this far in my career and like have blown that so badly? Like, it's such an obvious thing. And then also like, we're humans, and I just did not
exactly just wanted to say that.
Yeah. So most of my failures have been of a sort of human type, and like that's okay. I like to make fewer of them over time and learn from the ones I make so that I don't keep making the same kinds of mistakes.
Yeah, you seem to be very inspired when you're talking about Daily. And one of the things that I saw about when I was looking about Daily and your activities, that it's remote first or company. Is that correct?
Yeah, completely remote. In fact, there's no office at all.
And you were talk a lot about remote in other uh, both in MailChimp. I think I saw you mentioned that you moved a little bit the company or changed a
Mhm.
little bit with a remote culture. And there, yeah, like you're also in different location right now, as far as I understood, working remotely. Um, is it hard to work remotely for you?
It's so funny. I have mostly worked remotely in my career for like more than 20 years. I've worked in remote roles or like at MailChimp. I ran the satellite office MailChimp is based in Atlanta, which is southern United States, and I ran the office that was in Brooklyn, which is in the Northeast. And so that was a little bit of a hybrid in that many of our colleagues were not local, but I did work in person with local people.
Hmm.
Um, I find it typically easier and more effective to work with people remotely with occasional in-person check-ins. A couple of times a year you meet, or sometimes a little more often, but in fact at Daily we meet less often than that. But I don't I respect that some people find it hard and don't especially like it, and other people do. I don't think it's universally worse or better, easier or harder in either direction.
Because remotely also comes with different time zones,
Hmm.
and there are different locations, like different countries. If you think about Europe, United States, Asia
Yeah.
Pacific, and different cultures, also different locations that bring different cultures.
Hmm.
Did you ever had this experience, like working with international company teams or
Hmm.
remotely over several time zones?
Yeah, for sure. Daily, I think we're in like 20 countries or something among
Oh,
60
nice.
people. Like it's a lot, and it is completely around the globe. So yeah, and I've had that experience many times, and it's hard. Like physics are hard. You can't make the sun move in a different way. There's just, that's what it is. But I think there are things you can do that make it easier to connect. You can, for example, designate small chunks of time each day when everybody has to be available for either team collaboration or full, like all hands kinds of meetings. And that can be at different times, so that for some people it's early sometimes and for some people it's late sometimes, but nobody's expected to be working at a difficult hour 100% of the time and all days of the week. And I will note that that's not just a problem of remote companies, but any global company. And many global companies are completely in person, but have coworkers around the world. And mostly, and any individual might work completely with people who aren't even in their local office. So the issue of like that sort of distance communication has been one people have been dealing with for decades, at least.
Yeah, but I think with remote, you are basically more or less in your home
Hmm.
office, so
Hmm.
and you're kind of alone. When we talk about international company, that when we're people used to go to the office, meet colleagues
Yeah.
from this location, right? And you were feeling a sort of a team in France, Belgium, Germany, United States, in different locations. And here you basically, you and I are sitting at our home offices right now, and basically talking to our colleagues without that physical kind of connection and being a part of a team that meets occasionally offline. Well, occasionally meaning previously every day, right?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it depends so much on the company, the team, and the humans. Like, I an interesting thing when I ran the Mailchimp office in Brooklyn, there were a number of people who came to the Brooklyn office every day, but all of their teammates were somewhere else. We're in Atlanta, we had an office in Oakland, and we had a handful of remote people around the country. And so they'd come in every day, and because that was sort of how we were set up, and then they'd be like, why am I here? Like, it was nice to see people or go out to lunch with people, but they basically felt like they were coming in for free food a couple times a week, and it didn't feel like a really good use of time.
Hmm.
And totally respect that, because most they were basically coming into an office to have a worse experience of working on video because they would have to go find like a little booth to work in because they'd be in a room with too many people to hold video calls. And so like that's an individual might like that. Not everybody likes working from home. Some people like to come in for the free food, like the connection with colleagues, just being near people. But other people don't, and not all jobs require it or don't require it every day. And I think that kind of recognizing the unique needs of the people and kind of the teamwork at hand is part of the key to making any sort of hybrid setup work.
Now, yeah, this hybrid work, I guess it's in the news last year or so when MAANGA said like, well, you have to come back to the office at least partially, depending on the company, different rules.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I was talking to a friend recently who works at a very large company that is requiring people to come back to the office, and they're meeting incredible resistance because people don't want to go to the office, partly because they don't work with people in their own office. Like it's not how their work is structured. And interestingly, one of the things that the friend said was that the company knows that having people come into the office will result in less productivity for individuals. Like people are more productive working from home for the most part. Some people like coming in the office, but mostly people work better working from home. They're less distracted. They can be more focused. They can flex time in ways that work for them. It tends to be better. But the company felt like they had spent quite a lot of money on real estate that was you couldn't get that money back and was going unused, and they were not okay with that. And B, they thought that culturally it would be a long run boost to the company, even if it was individual loss of productivity, to have more people in the office more of the time. And I thought that was an interesting way to think about a potential reason you would have people come back. I think it's that wouldn't be true for every company, and people do it a lot, bring people back to the office out of sort of habit, reflexive. It just seems like that's how you work. But I do think that it was pretty honest to say that actually the company has spent a lot of money on real estate and is not okay just letting it sit there.
Well, that's a kind of a lame reason to make people come back to office. Well, I think the second one is when basically you say people are getting a bit connected, and that brings me here to their offsites for remote full company. You have offsites in Daily, I guess, or how do you do this?
We don't actually.
No. Oh.
Daily is very aggressively a remote company. We occasionally have something where people will be in the same city. So for example, this week we ran some workshops in San Francisco and New York, and people who were in the Bay Area or in the New York area came together to attend the workshops that we were running and help run them and go out to lunch kind of thing. But we don't yet have retreats either at the team level or the company level. And I don't know if we will. That might be something that as we grow and people it's easier to not know people because we're getting bigger. If that becomes a reason to start to have more retreat or have any retreats, or if we just double down on a completely remote culture. I will say, I mean, as a person who likes and has sought out remote roles for years, I do think there is value in getting together with people in person at least a couple of times a year for some more sort of longer meetings, generative work. It's a little bit easier and faster to work over video when you've met in person. I don't think it's necessary, but it's nice.
Yeah, I think it also helps when you meet people offsite and then continue working remotely. Then you have that, right. I don't know, spark between your that was there when you were together in the same place, and then basically kind of I saw this person, this body. I know they're and yeah, I don't know how this works, but it's indeed. I also had this experience that I go somewhere for a half a day, fly over half of Europe to meet somebody, just to have a coffee and have a short conversation. But then their communication was way better remotely with
Mhm.
that person or that group after meeting together for half a day even.
Yeah, totally. There is something that sure about having an experience with people in person where you kind of make some meaning together in that experience and you see them uh, navigating different things than you can see over video, and that can provide some real depth. I mean, on the other side of it, I do think that it's certainly possible to take advantage of video in ways that we don't tend to do in person. So, for example, when people are comfortable with it, being able to see more of where they live and who their family are and like pets that they have, that gives you a kind of an intimacy and a connection with each other that now when I work in offices, I'm like, how can I possibly know you? I've never seen your cat and your kid. Like, this is so weird to not have that lens into people and that way of knowing each other and kind of being in each other's spaces is it's a different sort of connection as well.
No, that's true. That's true. And there, when um, when you work remotely, do you have any kind of a recipe, the things that people should do, like talk asynchronously or respect their, let's say, business hours for of each other? What are like several things that you should care about when you work remotely to make this kind of setup work?
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a good question because I think it's basically no matter what your setup is, whether you're in person or remote or hybrid, you need some agreements about how you're going to work together. And typically, teams have some combination of implicit and explicit agreements, things that you sort of just do and things that you've had to figure out together. Um, I think the one you just referred to about do you ping people at any point in time? Can you DM people at all hours? It's a good idea to have some agreement about what's how are you going to use notifications. So in Slack, for example, is the rule that you can send people messages anytime, but they turn off their notifications and are not expected to check at any time? Or is the rule that you use the scheduling feature and you don't send things except within your own time zone or within their time zone? There's lots of ways to think about that. And there's no way that's the right way. The right way is for the team to decide together what works for the team. And
Mm-hmm.
certainly it's easy to abuse that. And you don't want people who are like at channeling and at hearing everybody around the clock. Like that's hairy, bad for everyone. But having some agreements about when it's okay to use those things and how else you want to communicate, that's critical. And in fact, some of that stuff is true in person. Like it's just a lot more implicit usually. So the norm in person is not that you're there 24 hours, and people would expect that you would have a different level of reachability when you're not in the office, but not, it might not be none. It might be some level of reachability. And then you'll sort of talk about what does that look like. So similar for fully remote companies, you just need to talk it through.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but basically, when you're kind of in an open space sitting there and people see you, well, possibly he or she there, I can, well, come approach this person with my question. And there, this is different experience when you see like a green dot online saying, okay, well, or
Mhm.
possibly the person just forgot
Right, right.
or to turn it off and like, okay, let me ping that person, but then it comes into an argument that basically, yeah, well, it's I'm it's too late for me to chat or and
Right.
kind of things.
Totally. But the opposite is true in person in the sense that a lot of times the person that you see across the room is really in flow and they're not wanting to be interrupted because they're doing heads down work. And so teams sometimes have agreements in person of like you DM somebody before you go bother them. Or if you're wearing headphones, that means don't come talk to me now. Or I'm going to work in this quiet area of the office, and that means do not disturb. So people have sort of parallel conventions in person and online and similar kinds of problems. Is it okay to interrupt now and is it not? And it's different cues, headphones on, green dot on. But sometimes somebody left their headphones on and forgot, and maybe they're actually available. And sometimes the green dot is on, but they're not actually anywhere near their laptop or don't want to be disturbed. There's not a perfect way. Again, sort of
Mm-hmm.
having some agreements that you're about what your goals are and how you're going to meet them to kind of work for everybody. That tends to be what's really trust building and helps people work together effectively.
Uh, we say working remotely, but we also say sometimes working from home, which might be
Yeah,
different, right? Your
right,
home
right.
and remotely are two different things. And I know people who work remotely sometimes take this as an advantage and like go surfing during their daytime or during their
Yeah.
lunch. Do you do any kind of this activities that are available to you because you are working
hmm
remotely?
Um, yeah, it's so funny that you asked that. My partner is the CEO of Medium and was able to work the last couple of weeks um, from an RV in Arizona where he was mountain biking after hours, but there was plenty of Wi-Fi. So he was in his meetings all day because his meetings are normally, they're a remote company by default. So his meetings are normally on a laptop. He was in the laptop in the RV, and then after work he was able to mountain bike. This week we're normally based in Brooklyn, but we're in Boston at my brother's, helping to take care of kids. And as far as for me, the thing that's big difference is I have a treadmill desk at home and I don't have one here, so I'm sitting a lot more than I normally do.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
But um, flexibility is nice. And also my company, I mean, because it's fully remote, people are constantly dialing in from like very different places than they normally work. People travel a lot, and there's a lot of discussion of, oh, I'll be dialing in from 8 time zones away from where I normally am, or
Uh,
you'll see them working on a beach or whatever.
yeah, yeah, nice. With COVID, when lots of people went remotely, and I
Mhm.
had that experience as well, and I realized that I started to work more than I have been
Mm,
working when I went to office, and yeah, do you have this experience as well?
yeah. Yeah, that's a work from home problem rather than a remote problem. Um, I do remember that when I first started to work from home regularly, which was like more than 25 years ago, because I worked as a freelance journalist for a while. So it was a long time ago. I had to start making plans most evenings so that I had an end of the day. And
Hmm.
I could say, okay, I'm closing. At the time, it wasn't laptops, it was like desktop computers that I was stepping away from the machine and going to go do something else. And then now I've gotten much better at the habit of saying the end of the day is the end of the day, and I'm closing the laptop and I'm doing other things. That does take some discipline, but sometimes a way that you can work things out on your team is to have agreements about, not only will you not be disturbed at some hours, but sometimes teams have rules that you can't send messages after a certain time in your own time zone. So
Hmm.
it enforces a little bit. You might be doing heads down work, but it helps provide a little bit of guardrail around your
Hmm.
day.
Hmm. Yeah, it all depends on the team, but like as I said, my personal experience from working from home was like, okay, well, you don't have to travel, and okay,
Yeah.
let's do something here, something there, and like, well, plus 1 2 hours easily in the evening, and you don't have to walk a lot, especially during the COVID time. So, well, you couldn't go a lot there. So,
Yeah.
okay, all right, well, I'll just continue doing what I did during the day, and well kind of very strange, but indeed you have to set the rules and try to limit yourself to be like a healthier combination of work and well work-life balance if that exists.
If it exists. Did you find anything that worked for you that helped you say, kind of, here's the end of the day?
Actually, I defined working hours for me. I started working a bit later, so I spent
Hmm.
time with my wife, and then I made a hard stop a lot around 7 p.m.
Yeah.
That wasn't optimal in general because I kind of had a bit longer morning and a bit shorter evening, so I couldn't plan any long activity for neither for morning nor for the evening. I could go for a bike ride or I can go for a joke, but like going out somewhere didn't really work during their weekend. And that was specific of different time zones that I had to work with. And with a US time zone, I have like 7 hours difference. It's kind of hard to have a smaller overlap if you want to achieve something.
Yeah, right. So that's a combination of like it's remote work and work from home issues. Yeah, it's complex. And also sort of points to like there isn't one solution, because part of your problem was people in the US and part of it was like new to working from home and how you get
People
that
in the
sorted.
US are not my problem. Working different time zones is my problem.
Yes.
That's
Yes. Yeah. Okay, fair. Better. That's a better way to put
it. And so basically, with the daily, it's a full remote with the MailChimp. What did you change, if you can share that? What did you change with the remote things? What did you introduce in MailChimp for moving towards remote or kind of culture or more things?
Well, as I said, part of my role was running the remote office in Brooklyn, the satellite office, which was when I joined, it was about a year old. The company was about 25 years old, and that office was just about a year old. It was pretty new. And there was also a new office in Oakland, in California, on the other side of the country. And part of my role was to help make sure that we both had a distinct culture in Brooklyn, but that we were integrated with the home base culture and the overall MailChimp culture. And a lot of that was just doing things like making sure that people in both places had a really good idea of how to work, how to do a sort of hybrid kind of work. So for example, in all of the offices, we had like fancy video setups where there'd be a camera that could see the whole room, and there'd be monitors in the room. And in theory, that stuff should work great for making, if you're meeting in Brooklyn with people in Atlanta, it should be really easy to see each other. But in practice, the technology we had and the technology that was available at the time meant that you couldn't hear each other well and you couldn't see each other well across rooms in different offices. But the very basic technology exists if everybody in a meeting where everybody is not in the same room, if everybody in that meeting uses their laptop to join on video, even if there's other people in the room that you can see, if you all just turn on your video on your laptop and use shared audio in a room where there's multiple people, you can all see each other. Everybody, if there's one person who's remote, if everybody has their laptop camera on, works great. If there's 14 people in the meeting, but you're in different rooms, if everybody has their laptop camera on, it makes a really big difference. So just kind of introducing that idea, and I think, I'm not sure actually, I don't remember now, I might have not introduced it, it might have been somebody before me had introduced it, but trying to champion that idea, and kind of help people understand that we don't want anyone to have the experience of being a remote worker or being outside of the meeting looking in. We want everyone to participate in meetings. I think that's part of the sort of cultural change that I was trying to help bring there.
And with technology evolving, do you think VR can help to rebuild this experience better or change this experience of remote communication?
That's a good question. I haven't, I guess what I have seen are things like apps where everybody in the meeting is joining some kind of like a virtual office, or a virtual theater or something like that. And my experience with those is that people who get used to using them can find it really helpful and a really nice way to connect. But like almost any software, you have to get used to it for it to be valuable. There's like a learning curve to, usually the functionality is pretty straightforward, but figuring out how to make it valuable for you takes a little while. And I haven't used any of that software regularly enough, but I certainly see the potential for it.
So it's basically people come into the office, sitting in the same room, but they're with their VR lenses on them, and imagining
Oh,
they're
I see.
somewhere on the
Yeah.
beach.
Right. I wasn't thinking about it like that, although I was thinking of it more like you're just looking at a screen where you're seeing the same thing on the screen. But yeah. I mean, that's interesting. I do have like um an Oculus, and I could see. I think the hardware isn't there yet for it to be comfortable to be in a
Hmm.
meeting and like wearing a headset. But I could certainly see like in another 5 years or something, we might have, maybe it's 10 years, hardware goes much more slowly than you think, that we might have the capacity to have comfortable software that would make it more possible for more people to feel like you're having the same experience. And it's a rich experience that makes it worth connecting that way.
Yeah, let's see. Let's see how it evolves.
Yeah.
I want to move to the last topic for today that I wanted to talk to you
Yeah.
about is um, I want to know basically why you decided to become a manager. What
Yeah.
were the forces driving you?
Yeah. Um, Really, one reason, I had a lot of jobs with really bad managers, and I just thought, this is miserable. I really do not like working for bad managers. It's got to be possible to do this better. And um, I was really motivated by the idea of being a manager who could make things better for people who worked with them. And I'm better at that now than I used to be. Um, that's a it's like a it's a journey, not a destination, you know. But um, but that still motivates me, you know, trying to create an environment where people can be productive and find it satisfying and um, be respected for the work that they're doing. Like all of that feels still feels important and interesting to me.
Nice, interesting. And if people want to go from EM to VP, what should they care about? How do they approach that path?
They should care about asking the person who's in the role that they want to get into at the organization where they are, because that path looks super different at every company.
Hmm.
And of course, it's possible that asking that of somebody who's in the role already could feel threatening. So find people who are in a similar role, in a similar size and stage of company, because the path to VPE from EM at a company that's 60 people and is 5 years old is different than the path from EM to VPE at a company that's 1,000 people or 10,000 or 100,000 people and is 20 or 40 or 100 years old. And kind of understanding what that looks like, that's kind of, those details are important. And I would say too, the job is pretty different at really
Hmm.
big companies. It's typically much more politicized. And if that's something you don't know yet, if you want to deal with, learning what that's like, that's worth asking about at any company. But that's a different job than usually the job at smaller companies where there's probably more, um, you're probably closer to the strategy and the tactics both.
No, I'm laughing about politicized because I work for government right now, and it's really politicized.
Yeah, yeah. So I worked for government for a while. I worked in the federal government on a team that tried to help other government teams build software in a modern way.
Hmm. Hmm.
And one of the things, the part of the nature of that organization was that we hired people from private sector, technology, private sector, to work in government for a few years. And everybody who came from the private sector, me included, was always surprised to find how political people were inside of government. The non-politicians, like the civil servants, were very political. We were always surprised by that. Like, I don't know why people just humans, you know.
Yeah, well, hope it changes for better in their all the governments and their well, we are here as their software people, as managers, leaders to help their government
Yeah,
of each country, I guess. Thank you, Sarah, for this conversation.
yeah.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks for being here. If people want to reach out to you, where could they find you?
Yeah. So I'm easy to find at Daily. You can email me at Daily at sarah@daily.co. I'm on LinkedIn. I have, although I happen to have been the 21st user of Twitter, I have stepped back from Twitter lately. And I'm just starting, we've got a toe in Mastodon. So I'm Sarah M at fiasco.social on Mastodon.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So yeah, again, thanks for this conversation, and it was nice having you.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Yeah.